I'm going to be talking about planting today, even in February. Hi, I'm Robin. Welcome to Robin's Container Garden. When you start planting is completely and utterly dependent on just two things: where you are and how much space that you have to store your seedlings once they start coming up. We are in Scotland, so as you guys know, our growing season here is a little bit short. So we need to kind of give as many seedlings as much of a head start as possible. So I do start my seedlings a bit early. Now last year I made the big mistake of starting my peppers and my aubergines and a couple of other things in January because I was so excited. I have since calmed myself right down and made a big note for myself in my garden journal that I'm not going to be starting those seedlings that early this year. I ended up with a bit of a jungle in the kitchen last year, and I'll show you. So we're going to try to get away from that this year, but I'm still going to have to start seedlings early. So I thought about planting herbs early this year. I had some herbs on my windowsill last year in the office, and they did really well. So I decided to plant some herbs and get them started, and then put those in the windowsill in the office to let them grow until it was time for them to come and be planted outside. The next thing I decided to plant were things that I knew were hardy. So these are things that I know will be okay to be put outside before the last frost date for this year. One of those things is onions, and the other thing was leeks. So I planted those last week, and I'll just let myself tell you about it. Okay, so we're here in the kitchen because I don't have anywhere else to do this. I'm going to be planting some onion seeds and some leek seeds. Now, I know that it's a little bit late to be planting onions, but I'm going to try. Even if they're smaller, I'm going to give them a shot. I tried both of these, onions and this leek, last year, and they failed miserably. And I think what happened was that I overwatered them. So I'm going to try a new technique this year and see how we get on. The good thing about onions and leeks is that I don't have to wait until the last frost to put them outside, because they're very hardy, and I can get them to a certain size and then go ahead and plant them outside. And I'm going to be doing leeks and onions in containers, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to try doing these onions in one of these containers. I don't want to take up a lot of space. I don't want to take up a lot of growing medium and all that kind of stuff, because like I said, last year these failed miserably, and at this point, I'm just going to see if I can get them grow. This is an experiment. We all like our experiments, don't we? So I've already made my labels. I'm going to put the Ailsa Craig ones on that side, and I'm going to put the red and pastas on that side. Now, I've also ordered some onion sets to see which ones are going to do better. They won't actually arrive until March, so can't really do anything with those until they get here. So these are the red and pastas. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to sow tons of them. When you order these onion seeds, you get millions of them. So I'm actually just going to kind of cast them on the top. Put the rest of those in there. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to sow millions of them. This is basically to find out if I can actually do it with this new technique and it work. Now these are the Ailsa Craigs. I'm just casting a few of the seeds, just a pinch. I mean, there's probably about 15 or 20 in here, but in each one of these little cells. So I'm carefully putting those back in, not over the compost, like a big dummy. Okay. Okay, now, instead of covering this with compost, what I'm going to do is something completely new, something that I've not done before. It's not new to gardeners, it's just new to me. So instead of covering this with compost, which I've noticed with other things, that sometimes a layer of compost, especially on top of seeds that are tiny, it kind of compacts a little bit over the top. When you start having the seedlings coming up, you can sometimes get a little, almost like a little crust that starts to come up. So I'm going to try vermiculite. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cover the top just to give it some cover. Not too thick, but not too thin either. I want to completely cover the soil here, right? And this won't bind over the top of the seeds. And so when they come up, they should just come up. That's the idea anyway. Like I said, this is an experiment, something I've never done before. I'm doing this one on these onions. I'm also going to do it on the leeks as well. A little bit more. Okay, so now I'm going to tamp them down a wee bit just to make sure that those seeds have good contact with the soil and with the vermiculite. And then I'm going to water them down, make sure they get watered in really well. And then I'll put them on the heat mat. So we'll set those aside. And now I want to try more leeks. We probably would eat, if we had grown them in the garden, we probably would be eating more leeks than onions. So I'm going to be growing quite a few leeks, or trying to grow quite a few leeks. I'm not going to cast these quite as thick for a very specific reason, because I'm going to be growing leeks in containers, which sounds a bit silly, but I have a plan, and I will share that plan with you in another video. But for now, you're just going to have to trust me. So this is going to go, will that go through there? Hey, looky there. There's a little slot for a label. I don't even have to. That's pretty handy, isn't it? I'm just going to sow just a little sprinkle of them in each cell. And again, I'm doing this because I just want to kind of keep the numbers down in the cells. So when it comes time to replant them, when they get a little bit bigger, and put them out, because I'm not gonna plant these up. I'm just going to put them in their containers. They will need to be hardened off, just like any other plant, but they're hardy. So even if we do get a frost after they go outside, they should be okay. So now these are going to go back in the seed packet. See, this is why you don't ever put seeds back in the seed packet. I just spilled 2 or 3 of these seeds onto the counter. You can't see that, but there's about 3 or 4 seeds went onto the counter. Those would have ended up in my compost, and I would have had rogue leek seeds somewhere. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with the leeks as I did with the onions. They're getting covered in vermiculite. It'll help keep the moisture in without creating that crust, we hope. This is, like I said, this is an experiment. Spread that out a bit and tamp it down. So I filled the containers right up to the top, because I knew I was going to tamp it down a little bit, which will keep the water, when I do water it, from coming over the top. But until the seedlings come up, they'll get watered from underneath. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put these in a tray, and I'm going to put these on the heat mat, see how they get on, and we'll check back in, hopefully within a few days, and we may have, fingers crossed, we may have some seedlings. So you are definitely going to need to know your last frost date. Now, if you live in the US or the UK, you can find your last frost date links down in the description below my video. Frost date is kind of a guideline, kind of like from that pirate film, more of a guideline than a rule. Basically, the last frost date is calculated by averaging out the last frost date over the last several years, and that frost date could either be 2 weeks early or 2 weeks late. Now, because our last frost date is the middle of May, we usually don't plant anything out until the first part of June, because you can get caught out. We've had snow in this area as late as mid-March. So you never can tell about those last frost dates. We could have a heat wave, and then a couple weeks later, we could actually have that really heavy frost that could kill everything. So I want to make sure that whatever I'm planting now that I don't have space to store can be planted outside before the last frost date, the hardy stuff like onions and leeks. The next thing that you have to consider, like I said, is your space. You want to make sure that you have room for all of the seedlings that you're going to be making as you're planting your seeds. The most obvious place to put seedlings is the windowsill. And we've all got windows. I hope we all have windows. If we don't all have windows, that makes me very sad because I love my windows. But not all of my windows are warm. They don't all get sunshine in the winter. Only the ones on the west side of the house. Now you guys know, if you've watched my channel for any length of time, that is my sun trap, is the west side of the house. That's the place in our garden that gets most of the sun and most of the heat in the spring and the summer. There's only 2 windows. There's actually 3, but one's covered up with a piece of furniture. We're about to have to rethink that. But there's 2 windows that I have access to, the one in the kitchen and the one in the office. And those face west, and those are the ones that get the most of the sunshine and the most of the heat from the sun in the winter and the early spring. So that will be where the seedlings will be stored. Now, you guys also know that I have, had a poly greenhouse, half greenhouse, that I had, notice I'm saying past tense, round the back. We had a terrible, terrible windstorm one night, and that particular greenhouse where it was sitting was on the opposite side of our bedroom wall. And about 4:30 in the morning, I heard this almighty crash, and I just knew it without knowing it that the poly greenhouse was no more. The next morning, got up out of bed, went outside, looked around, everything looked okay back here, everything looked okay around the front of the house, and then I poked my head out the back door, and this was what I saw. Yeah. It's DEET. So, very kindly was gifted a new poly greenhouse from a very dear friend of mine. So when it gets a little bit warmer, we're going to be putting up that poly greenhouse, and we're going to be doing some reinforcement with the skeleton of the old greenhouse. So you'll definitely, it's another video that I'm going to be making to help people know how to reinforce these things, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we won't have that happen again. That's going to be something that I don't really have to lean on until it gets a little bit warmer and we can put that poly greenhouse up. Probably, I'm going to say April-ish, maybe mid-April, maybe late April. Kind of depends on things. That is one of the things that I'll be doing that will increase my space to be able to put seedlings as they're going up, because you guys know last year that's where loads of my seedlings were, in the spring and the summer before everything went out. That was where I started seeds even. So that was one of the things that I was able to use to get the best of the space, but I don't have that this year, so we're just going to have to play it by ear and see what happens. So that concludes the series, the 4 Ps. Planning, purchasing, preparing, and planting. We're going to be doing a lot of planting over the coming weeks and the coming months. So I hope you've got your planting muscles ready. And you definitely need to tell me what you're going to be planting this month. This is February. So what are you planting now? Don't forget to tell me in the comments, because I'm desperate to know. So there you go. A little bit of winter sowing. That gets some planting out of my system for a little while. And I've got those herbs on the windowsill, and I've also got those onions and leeks going as well. Things are actually working. They're starting to pick up. I've noticed that the days are getting a lot longer, and they're a lot more palpable outdoors. That's where we are so far, and we will see how all this goes, and I'll keep you posted. And remember, you don't have to grow all the things, just grow something. Take care. Bye, y'all.